Imagine a palace bathed in golden sunlight. Flags flutter in the breeze. Musicians tune their instruments. The air hums with anticipation. It's the day of the royal wedding, and the king is throwing a lavish feast. No expense has been spared. The tables overflow with delicacies. The aroma of roasted meats and sweet spices fills the air. The palace gleams, ready to receive the most honored guests in the kingdom.
This is not just any celebration. This is a symbol of my love for my son and the joyous union about to take place.
The king has sent out invitations far and wide. He eagerly awaits the arrival of his guests, ready to share in the joy of this momentous occasion. The invitations were sent to the most esteemed people in the land. Nobles, dignitaries, wealthy merchants, all received the king's summons. But as the hours passed, a chilling realization swept through the palace. The guests were sending their regrets. One by one they declined the king's invitation.
Some were too busy with their fields. Others were preoccupied with their businesses.
Yes, I simply dismissed the invitation.
Their hearts were cold to the king's generosity. They had their priorities and the king's celebration didn't make the cut. Their indifference stung like a slap in the face. How could they disregard such an honor, such a privilege? The king was enraged. He had offered a place at his table, a share in his joy, and they had tossed it back in his face. His fury was terrible to behold.
I have shown them nothing but kindness and generosity, and this is how they repay me.
He vowed to punish those who had scorned his hospitality. The king, in his justice, dispatched his armies.
Those who had treated his invitation with contempt will face his righteous anger.
The palace, once brimming with joyous anticipation, was now heavy with the weight of betrayal. The empty tables stood as a stark reminder of the guests' disdain. The king's heart, initially overflowing with love and the spirit of celebration, was now heavy with sorrow and anger. Section 4. Open Invitation, a banquet for all. But the king's anger, though fierce, was matched by his boundless love for his son. The wedding feast would go on. He ordered his servants to go into the streets, into the alleys, to the edges of the kingdom.
Go and invite everyone you find, the poor, the crippled, the blind. Bring them all. My table will be full.
The servants obeyed, their hearts warmed by the king's compassion. They scurried through the streets, their voices ringing out with the king's invitation.
Come everyone, come to the wedding feast.
And to the astonishment of the townspeople, they came. The lame, the blind, the poor, they all came, humbled and grateful for the king's unexpected invitation. Section 5. The Man Without Wedding Clothes. The palace, once echoing with emptiness, was now filled with a joyful clamor. People from all walks of life feasted together, united by the king's grace. But then the king noticed a man without wedding clothes. He stood out like a single weed in a field of flowers. This man, though welcomed from the streets, had refused to wear the garment offered to him. He had come to the feast on his terms, refusing to acknowledge the respect and honor due to the king.
Friend, how did you come in here without wedding clothes?
The man was speechless. He had no excuse. He had mistaken the king's generosity for weakness. He had underestimated the gravity of the invitation. The king, grieved by the man's blatant disrespect, had him removed from the feast. Section 6. The RSVP we mustn't ignore. This parable, though ancient, speaks volumes to us today. The king's invitation is a symbol of God's grace, freely offered to all. The indifferent guests represent those who reject or ignore God's offer of salvation. They are too busy, too preoccupied with worldly matters, to recognize the greatest gift ever given. But the king's open invitation to the people in the streets shows us that God's grace is available to everyone, regardless of their past or social standing.
We all receive invitations in our lives. Some are small, some are life-changing. But the most important invitation is the one that offers us eternal life, forgiveness, and a place at God's table. How we respond to this invitation determines our eternal destiny.
Section 7. Accept the invitation, prepare your heart. The man without wedding clothes serves as a cautionary tale. We cannot come to God on our terms, clinging to our pride and self-righteousness. We must accept his invitation with humility and gratitude, clothing ourselves in the garment of his righteousness. The wedding feast is ready. The table is set. God, in his infinite love, is waiting. Will you accept his invitation? Will you clothe yourself in his grace and join the celebration? The choice is yours.